The light turns green and nobody moves. The car ahead is a statue, your knuckles go white on the wheel, and the city inside your ribs begins to rattle. A horn from behind. Another. You catch your face in the rear-view, jaw locked, breath short, eyes narrowing like a scope. It isn't betrayal. It isn't tragedy. It's a sleepy driver, a tiny delay, yet your whole body volunteers itself to a storm. You feel the handover happen the way you pass the keys of your mood to a stranger who doesn't even know your name. A voice you've been practicing quiet, older than anger, reminds you that control isn't out there at the light. It's here where your breath meets your mind. Not denial, discipline. You don't push the river. You place the rock. The chest loosens a notch. The horn behind you fades like weather. So the room changes first, then you. We begin where it always starts, seeing the pattern before it carries you off like floodwater. The city within your ribs can be governed. The day starts clean, then frays by inches. Coffee hisses a thin whistle. The cup is hotter than you expect, and a brown crescent kisses your shirt. You blot at it with a paper towel that leaves lint, then you're late to the elevator. Then the elevator stops on every floor as if conspiring. In the conference room, someone says, "We actually covered that last week, and the word actually carries a blade." You smile like a lid that barely fits the pot. Your breath lives high in your chest. The city within your ribs crowds its streets. You tell yourself you're reacting to this moment. But the truth moves differently. It's a dam, hairline cracks, no one sees water pressing quietly. Yesterday's slight, last night's poor sleep, the text left on, read the line at the pharmacy, the side comment at dinner that you took the long way again. Alone, each is a feather. Together, they're a weight you pretend you're not carrying. And then a feather touches the wall, and you say it was the feather. The voice returns, practiced like a kata. You don't push the river, you place the rock. You draw the breath lower into the belt line and let the jaw unlock by a millimeter. Your eyes widen by a degree, taking in the whole table instead of the one face that stung you. Nothing performative. No lecture to yourself. Just a small rotation of attention, like turning a lens until the blur snaps into contour. Across a much colder morning, a different room, canvas walls of the Danube camp bowing under wind. Marcus Aurelius hears soldiers arguing about rations. It's not about bread. It's about weeks of rain fever and sleep in wet boots. He holds the line inward first. He writes as if to anchor the day you have power over your mind, not outside events. He doesn't strike the table. He steadies the city within his ribs, and the tent seems to steady with him. The quarrel dies of lack of air. The river rushes. The rock remains. Back at your table, the meeting churns. Someone's laptop fan whines like a trapped fly. A colleague cuts across your sentence. The old habit reaches for the trigger, say, the clever line, make the room know. Your hand leaves the trigger instead. The pause is not a trick. It's a boundary line drawn in quiet chalk. The breath goes out. The story loosens. It isn't softness. It's choosing the order of operations: sensation, then appraisal, then action, rather than sensation, action, fallout. Epictetus would call it the hinge. It's not things, but opinions about things. You don't repeat the words like a spell. You let their shape guide the angle of your mind. The coffee stain is not disrespect. The email delay is not an insult. The remark might be careless, not calculated. You widen the frame until the heat has more room to cool. The damn image stays with you. You decide not with grand vows, but with a pen to keep a narrow ledger of moments when pressure flickers on. Not every hour. Not a performance review of yourself. A small index card in the pocket, traffic light 8:10. Actually 9:05. No reply, 11:40. You are mapping fault lines, not digging a trench. The discipline is looking once, not looking away. At lunch, you pass the driver in the garage who took 2 spaces again. The old story begins its sprint. People always people, and you hear the cadence of your steps shorten. You make one change, lengthen the exhale by a beat. The city quiets a street. Not denial discipline. You are not ignoring the world. You are arranging it within. The rock goes back into the river. Evening brings its second wind of irritations. A pot lid clatters. The news crawls with outrage. A loved one asks a question while your email is mid-sentence, and you almost use your tone to manage the room. You remember the tent in the wind. You picture a hand leaving a trigger. You lift your eyes, answer the person before you answer the screen. The dam holds, not because there was no pressure, but because you checked the faults before the surge. What you're really training is notice. The microsecond in which shoulders rise, in which the tongue presses to the palate, in which the mind writes a headline and sells it as truth. You step out of the storm to watch the rain. You are not the first to try this, and you won't be the last to forget and try again by afternoon. But repetition writes roads where there were only footpaths. The city within your ribs learns a calmer traffic. Marcus closes his notebook, warms his hands over a brazier, and listens for a moment to the wind thread through the guy ropes. He cannot stop the wind. He tightens the knot he can reach. It is enough. Back in your kitchen, the pot lid is found, the question answered, the email sent a minute later than pride wanted. Instead of the night becoming a casualty of a feather, it becomes a room where you practiced one small rock. And then it's quieter. The day did not change character. You did. Tomorrow will bring new feathers and the dam will need its walk. But you have seen the map. The fault lines are not enemies. They are routes. From here we can ask a softer, harder thing. What beneath these small sparks are you truly burning about? The phone buzzes in your pocket 3 times during dinner. Each time your fork hovers in the air, the warmth on the plate cooling while your mind sprints to the unseen screen. By the third, you snap not at the phone, but at the voice across the table that happened to speak while your patience was already spent. A look passes between you and her, the kind that lingers like smoke long after the flame. You realize too late it wasn't about her. It wasn't about the phone. It was about something else, older and heavier, sitting under your ribs like stone. That's the trick of anger. It wears the wrong name tag. It barges into the room, claiming to be about the fork, the text, the careless phrase, when in truth, it has tunneled up from somewhere deeper. Disrespect you've been swallowing at work. The low-grade hum of feeling invisible. The gnaw of failing to match the story you've written about yourself. Anger's costume is always local, but its origin is usually elsewhere. You raise your voice at the broken remote, when what you're really shouting at is the day's unraveling. The Stoics knew this misdirection well. Seneca wrote that anger is often grief in disguise or fear dressed in fire. He said the greatest remedy for anger is delay, not because delay erases feeling, but because it buys enough space for you to recognize its true source. Without that delay, you punish the wrong face swing at the wrong shadow. In a Roman courtyard, Epictetus once heard a student raging about an insult from a passerby. The man insisted it was dishonor proof he was treated as small. Epictetus asked calmly, was it the word that hurt you or your decision to take it as truth? The student bristled, but the lesson seeped in. The insult was a trigger, but the wound was self-made, stitched by pride. Epictetus himself, born a slave, carried scars and limps. Yet he didn't waste his life barking at each bark he heard. He looked beneath the noise. and trained himself to see the roots. Back at your table, the moment hangs. You set the fork down. You let the silence stretch. You don't reach for apology yet. You reach for tracing. What is this really about? You ask it not out loud, but inward with the same honesty you'd use in front of a mirror. The buzzing phone was only the feather. The crack ran deeper exhaustion from being always on call, a hidden resentment at feeling owned by other people's demands. You catch the real culprit, and the tension in the room shifts not because you've solved it, but because you stopped lying to yourself about what you were fighting. That's the move, not suppression, not explosion, but recognition. The recognition that anger is rarely honest. It's a messenger with the wrong envelope. When you tear it open, you find shame or fear or fatigue scribbled inside. And once you see that the grip loosens, it's harder to swing a sword when you realize you're pointing it at a ghost. Later alone, you jot the moment into a notebook. Nothing ornate, just a line snapped at dinner was really about exhaustion, not her. This is not self-help homework. It is cartography. You are mapping the hidden rivers that flood the city within your ribs. And maps are what keep you from confusing sparks for wildfires. Marcus Aurelius did this too, though his journal was never meant for us. Page after page, he untangled the wires, why he felt bitterness toward an officer, why grief for a dead child twisted itself into anger at fate. He wrote to remind himself that the enemy was not the rain or the soldiers or even death itself, but the stories he told in response. If you are distressed by anything external, he scribbled in dim light, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. So the dinner table becomes a field of practice. You don't excuse yourself from the sting, but you refuse to be tricked by its mask. You notice when anger comes wearing a false face. You ask the quiet question, what is this really about? And in that question, the city quiets. The dishes are cleared. The phone lies face down. The air is cooler, the look across the table softens. You didn't undo the whole knot, but you stopped tightening it. Tomorrow, new sparks will arrive, comments, delays, careless gestures, but with each the inquiry sharpens. Not denial, discipline. You trace the river back to its spring instead of blaming the pebble it moved along the way. And then it's quieter. The room has not changed. The discipline is simply seeing that most of the battles you think you're fighting out there are skirmishes within. You win by naming the true field. Which leads us to the next snare, the way you keep mistaking other people's storms for your own. The subway car is packed humid with too many breaths. A man shoulders past you without looking, his bag brushing against your chest, as if you're air. The old reflex stirs the need to claim space to let him know you exist. You feel it tighten in the ribs, climb the throat. For a heartbeat, you're certain this was aimed at you, an act of dismissal. But then the man keeps walking, eyes glued to his phone, unaware. Your fury was personal. His move wasn't. Most anger lives here in the gap between what happened and what you think it meant. Someone doesn't greet you in the hallway and you take it as contempt. A colleague skips your idea in the meeting and you call it sabotage. A stranger cuts you off in traffic and suddenly you're the center of a deliberate insult. You mistake the random for the targeted, the careless for the calculated. You turn noise into narrative, and the story is always about you. But the Stoics warned against this inward magnifying glass. They called the discipline apatheia, not indifference, but composure, the freedom to remain unmoved by what is outside your command. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings." He wasn't saying that others never stumble. He was saying that you don't need to bruise each time someone else stumbles into you. Picture a boulder in the middle of a rushing river. The water slams against it day and night, but the stone doesn't flinch, doesn't interpret each wave as an insult. It simply holds its place. The man on the subway never even saw you. The driver on the highway didn't know your name. Their waves crash, but you choose whether to treat them as knives. In a crowded forum centuries ago, an orator mocked Epictetus's limp, trying to draw laughter. The courtyard buzzed, eyes flicking toward the teacher. Epictetus, unmoved, answered only, "You are not mocking me, but the body I inhabit." The insult, so carefully aimed, found no target, because Epictetus refused to stand in its path. He saw the attempt, recognized it was never about his essence, and let it pass like river water. The laughter withered. The courtyard quieted. Back in the subway car, the man with the bag disappears into the crowd. The flare inside you cools once you see it clearly. He wasn't dismissing you, he wasn't even seeing you. The offense was yours, self-made. You unclench your hand around the railing. The city within your ribs releases one more street. Later that evening, your partner sighs at the sink. No words, just a sound of tiredness. But something in you bristles as if the sigh is aimed at you, as if you're the cause of it. Old pattern, interpret, absorb, defend. You almost ask, "What's that supposed to mean?" Instead, you watch the water flow over the dishes and let the question dissolve. The sigh belongs to her day, not to your ego. The storm passes without needing your thunder. This is not passivity. It's power. It's refusing to be drafted into every unseen war. When you make every shrug, every tone, every silence about you, you hand your peace to strangers and shadows. When you hold steady, you take it back. The discipline grows with each trial. The next morning, someone fails to return your email. The younger self would spin, "Are they ignoring me, undermining me, testing me?" Instead, you remember the stone in the river. You file the silence as neutral until proven otherwise. The city within your ribs stays calm. This doesn't mean you never respond. It means you don't bleed before the wound is real. It means you refuse to carry the weight of slights that were never meant for you. Most people are drowning in their own currents. Their tone, their glance, their missed word is about them, not you. And then it's quieter. The subway hums, the sink drips, the inbox waits. You stand as the stone, not as the storm. And when you stop making every moment about you, you discover how light the day can feel. From here, the next test asks not only whether to absorb or ignore, but whether the thing even matters at all 5 days from now or 5 minutes. The kettle shrieks in the kitchen, sharp and metallic. You rush to silence it, only to find that someone left the flame higher than you'd ever allow. A small thing, almost nothing, but your mind magnifies it. Carelessness, disrespect, proof you carry burdens no one else notices. Heat rises faster than the steam. You feel the voice wanting to lash the tongue, preparing its sentence. And then before it breaks free, you ask a question you've been keeping in your pocket. Will this matter in 5 days? The room shifts when you ask it. The kettle is still hot. The mistake is still there. But your mind jumps forward in time, scanning. In 5 days, will you even remember? Will the flame still burn on the stove of your memory? Or will it be as faint as smoke that already vanished? The breath slows. The words retreat. The city within your ribs saves itself a riot. This question is a blade cutting through noise. Because most of what steals your calm today will vanish into dust tomorrow. The missed call, the forgotten errand, the driver weaving between lanes. Each feels massive in the moment, but zoomed out they shrink until they barely register. The Stoics' new perspective was armor. They trained themselves to stretch their vision beyond the present flare, to see the trivial as trivial, the fleeting as fleeting. Marcus Aurelius, hunched over parchment by lamplight, wrote reminders to himself like knots on a rope. Think constantly of how many doctors have died after furrowing their brows over patients. How many astrologers after their grand predictions? How many generals after slaughtering whole cities? He wasn't being grim for the sake of it. He was teaching his mind to weigh the scale of things. Against eternity, against even a year, what is a careless flame on the stove, he trained his sight not to blur small and large into the same size. Back in your kitchen, the kettle is cooled, the flame adjusted. You wipe the counter and chuckle because you can already feel how absurd it would be to stain the whole evening over this. You sense how often you've done exactly that, carried a tiny inconvenience like it was across bruised relationships, with words that outlasted the moment, burned hours, replaying things that weren't even worth minutes. The test comes again on the commute. A pedestrian crosses too slowly at the light, the car behind honks, and you're caught in between, your pulse flaring. Again the question, will this matter in 5 days, 5 hours? The answer glows obvious: no. The breath leaves you like a valve. The anger doesn't vanish. You feel its heat, but it doesn't own you. You step out of the storm to watch the rain. Epictetus compared life's irritations to petty actors on a stage. Some stumble, some shout, some forget their lines. If you stop the play for every error, you'll never see it through. But if you remind yourself the performance continues, you save your strength for what endures. He told his students, "When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and reflect what similar faults you have." In other words, zoom out, shift scale, shrink the offense until it fits its true size. Even soldiers in war carried this discipline. In letters from the front, men wrote of sleepless nights, broken rations, endless mud. But when quarrels flared over scraps or insults, the wiser ones asked themselves, would this matter once the march resumed, once the enemy appeared? Perspective saved them from eating each other alive before the real test even came. You start to sense that each flare of anger is a scale problem. Your nervous system wants to treat every delay as mortal, but your reason can correct it. You can weigh the spark against the week, the month, the life you want. And in that weighing, the spike softens. Night comes. The kettle, the commute, the honk, the sigh, already they blur. What lingers is not their sting, but your choice to let them dissolve. The city within your ribs learns to file properly, urgent here, trivial there. The difference is peace, and then it's quieter. Not because the world grew gentler, but because you learned to stretch time around each spark, to see it for what it is, small, passing, unworthy of your empire. Next, the trial sharpens further. Can you not only zoom out, but pause in place to let the storm break around you without breaking you? The door slams before you even know your hand shoved it. A comment hit you wrong, your voice rose, and now you're alone in the hallway, staring at wood. The silence on the other side is heavier than any argument. This is what it feels like when anger is quicker than thought, when reflex leaps the fence before discipline wakes. You lean against the frame, wishing you could reel the words back in, wishing you'd held for just one more beat. That single pause would have changed everything. Anger is fast. It hijacks before reason has strapped its sandals. Most men live like faulty machines, trigger pressed, shot fired. No interval, no decision. The Stoics saw this clearly. They didn't demand that you erase feeling. They demanded that you build space between feeling and response. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. But the real power is over the fraction of a second when heat rises and your hand reaches for the trigger." In traffic, you've felt it. The driver cuts in your horn blasts almost before you register it. In meetings, the dismissal comes, and your reply is already spilling. The body moves before the mind consents. That's not control, it's surrender disguised as speed. The pause is the hinge. It's where freedom lives. Picture your anger like a bowstring. The insult pulls it taut, the muscles ache to release. But if you can breathe through that first stretch even for 2 counts, you stop being a weapon fired by others. You become the archer choosing when or whether to loose. It doesn't mean the string isn't tight. It means you decide. Epictetus, beaten by his master until his leg broke, is said to have warned, "If you continue, you will break it." When it snapped, he didn't scream. He didn't lunge. He observed, "There did I not tell you so?" Pain rose like fire, but he refused to hand over the pause. His tormentor owned his body, not his will. That's the edge. Discipline sharpens the ability to hold in the heat, to stand inside the flame without flailing. You practice in smaller fires. A co-worker's tone grates. Instead of snapping, you count your breath down 4 in, 4 out. Your hand clenches under the table, but you keep your tongue. The silence grows heavy, then lighter. The meeting moves on, and you remain intact. Later, you realize how much damage you avoided by pausing. The city within your ribs saved itself from burning its own houses. The practice repeats at home. A child spills juice on papers you needed. The old voice screams, "Careless." The pause interrupts. You press lips together, exhale. In that gap, you remember they are a child, not a rival. You mop, you smile, the papers are rewritable. The storm dissolves before it rains. Pausing doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous in the best sense. Anyone can lash out. It takes strength to hold steady while the world jabs. The soldiers who stand firm while arrows fly are not passive, they are trained. Each pause you build is a shield fitted to your ribs. Each silence you guard is armor. Marcus in the war tents faced complaints, betrayals, endless pressure. Had he shouted each time, Rome would have fractured faster. Instead, he wrote to himself to wait for the right moment and not let fury drive the pen. The empire required his steadiness more than his spark. Your life, smaller in scale but not in weight, asks the same. The hallway door is still shut, but you choose differently now. Instead of pacing, you breathe. The heat subsides enough to knock gently to open a conversation without weapons. The pause gave you back the chance to mend, and then it's quieter. The reflex is not gone, but you've built the smallest ledge between the trigger and the shot. Next time, maybe it will be wider. Next time, maybe silence will outlast the spark. From here, the question grows larger. How do you prevent the same fires from needing so much control? How do you shape the space around you so anger doesn't always find tinder? The phone buzzes at 10 p.m. You know the name on the screen even before you turn it over, the client who never respects hours, who always wants just one quick thing. Your thumb hovers, your chest tightens. You feel the irritation rising not from the message itself, but from the pattern you've allowed. No line, no guardrail, no shield. You answer anyway, voice clipped, already burning. And you see it clearly, anger often blooms where boundaries never did. Most men think they're angry because people demand too much. But the truth is quieter, they never drew the line. They let calls through at midnight, let friends jab with jokes that cut, let coworkers pile their plates. Then they snap over something small, confused why the pressure is always so high. The Stoics would call it negligence, not of others, but of the self. A soldier without armor can't blame the arrow. Marcus Aurelius didn't waste nights chasing approval or carrying fool's baggage. His meditations show a man reminding himself where Rome ended and where he began. Epictetus, born a slave, learned that freedom first meant ruling your own consent, deciding what you would accept, what you would not. No man is free, he told his students, who is not master of himself. That mastery starts with borders drawn in plain lines. You see this play out the next morning at work. A colleague slides a stack of tasks your way, smiling as if it's natural. The old you would take it, grind silently, then fume at night about disrespect. Instead, you breathe, straighten, and say, "No, that's not mine." The words land softly but firmly. There's a silence, then the stack retreats. You didn't shout, you didn't storm. You drew the line and defended your city before the enemy camped inside. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're structure. The river that floods destroys villages. The river that runs between banks gives life. When you fail to set banks, you mistake chaos for generosity, resentment for kindness. Anger then leaks through every crack. But when you define your edges, your peace has room to breathe. At dinner with friends, one makes a joke at your expense. Everyone laughs and you force a grin, but inside the ember catches. Later you explode in the car, not at the joke, but at the buildup of years of swallowing. This time you choose differently. You chuckle once, then meet the friend's eyes and say lightly, "Not tonight." The table shifts, surprised but respectful. You drew the line without a scene. And when the night ends, there is no ember to smolder. The city within your ribs learns the rhythm, "This is mine, this is not." Calls after hours, not mine. Snide remarks, not mine. Work dumped without consent, not mine. You don't need to fight every offender when you've built walls they can't cross. Clarity does the fighting for you. The Stoics were not saints of tolerance. They were architects of limits. They knew that endless exposure to nonsense corrodes the soul. By choosing what to admit and what to refuse, they preserved their strength for battles worthy of it. Your anger, once scattered like sparks, begins to concentrate into steady flame. And here another tool enters: humor. Because sometimes the world is too absurd to take seriously. A driver shouts at you for following the rules. A stranger argues in circles about nothing. You smirk, not in cruelty, but in relief. You step out of the play and watch it like theater. The laugh is not surrender, it is sovereignty. It is refusing to let nonsense draft you into its army. Think of soldiers under fire who cracked jokes in the mud. Not because war was funny, but because laughter punctured panic, made the unbearable breathable. Humor is not escape. It's control. It says you don't get to script my reaction. I'll choose even to smile. So you end the week with a lighter chest. The phone still buzzes, the world still jabs, but you have banks for your river armor, for your body, and even a grin for the absurd. The storm still rages, but you no longer live bare-skinned under it. And then it's quieter. The anger that once flared at every pebble now has less soil to grow in. You've drawn your lines, found your pause, learned to laugh. What remains is the deeper turn, the way you respond, not just in moments, but as the man you are becoming. The closing test is identity, not reaction, but response aligned with who you want to be. The car ahead still sits at the green light. The horn behind you sounds sharp and expectant. Once this would have owned your chest, turned your ribs into drums for someone else's tempo. But tonight you breathe, you widen your gaze, you let the river rush without dragging you. The city inside your ribs holds its streets. This was never about silence for its own sake. It was about choosing the man you become with each small spark. You are not the puppet of traffic or tone or carelessness. You are the one who places the rock, who leaves the trigger untouched, who steadies the tent in the wind. And then it's quieter. The world keeps its noise. You keep your frame. And in that stillness, you recognize what the Stoics always knew. The strongest victory is not over them, but over yourself.